Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. The war is escalating in the Middle East, now with US and UK drone strikes in Yemen. We have an entire city, a metropolis that was found in the Ecuador Amazon jungle. That'll come in the end. And we have a lot of news in regards to inflation. So let's get started. Overall, we have a situation where there's an expectation that the interest rates are going to fall this year. Obviously, we have an election to go, so obviously they need to drop them, so we're in re-election. But there's the inflation numbers came out, and there's not overall a lot of economic news that happened this week outside of some interesting news when it comes to, for example, the climate and things like that. We have literally the entire U.S. is in a polar vortex, I think they're calling it. Canceled flights of 400,000 homes without power, and that kind of thing is going to keep happening, in my opinion. I also think that we're probably going to see a really bad terrorist attack this year due to the situation in the southern border. We don't know who's coming into the country, and we also have a pretty bad situation when it comes to the food banks in New York, for example, in Brooklyn, are having to turn back families because they don't have money to buy food. Because if you guys don't know what's happening, in New York, they're receiving the influx of migrants that are coming from Texas because Texas is sending them, Florida as well, and they just don't have money to be able to pay for things anymore. Overall, the stock markets in the United States, mostly positive. Toronto is positive as well. Canada, and the conspiracy theory, climate news. I love that button. I figured I'd put this in the beginning since a lot of you guys were asking for it. 2 weeks after the quote-unquote hottest year ever, the NFL game between the Bills and the Steelers had to be postponed for snow. It was the fourth coldest NFL game in history, and they started in 1922. And one of the things that was really interesting, I'll say that for next week. Sweden had record cold temperatures as well. Negative 48.8 degrees Celsius. That's negative 56 Fahrenheit. One of the things that was really interesting is that, we have this renewable energy drive, which I'm all about renewable energy, except when it doesn't work in the freezing cold. And now the wind turbines that they've installed, they just completely shut down because they don't work in that level of cold. If you guys remember also the electric buses that they all purchased, they had to cancel bus routes because the buses don't work in the cold either. So it's going to be, I think the direction that we're heading in is going to be a lot of chaos because since a lot of the countries are moving toward the renewable energy, the problem is when there's no sun and there's no wind, there's no energy. And we haven't built up the capacity, like Elon Musk said, for example, to be able to store the energy with batteries and things like that. But if we have really, really cold weather, we might have a problem where they might not work either. In Washington, Wall Street Journal article, there is a cancer striking more young people and doctors are alarmed and baffled. I wonder what it could be. And Fauci, if you guys know, are essentially the architect of the pandemic, admits that the 6-foot distancing rule was just appeared and it's not based on any science behind it. Now, Dr. Birx, which was the other doctor, if you guys remember, the scarf lady, she talked about how long the C word, I don't want to say it because then I'll put on a list, they'll ban me again. But the long sickness from the pandemic is exactly like HIV, she said, because it destroys your immune system. If you guys remember 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was studies that were done that the more things that you take in your arm, the more likely you are to get the pandemic virus, let's call it the virus, from China. China. I love them. And if you get it, you're more likely to have the long one, which means that the more that you get the thing in your arm, the more likely you are to get this long virus, which means that you're literally getting, just like HIV, you're destroying your immune system. There's going to be a lot of problems in the future, unfortunately. Overseas market news. Oh, there is, I recommend if you guys have had side effects or, there's somebody that I found who's against it, look for McKinney Health, base detox. I think it's called BSD, based spike detox. base spike protein detox. And you can order the pills from there. It's like a concoction that he found to remove the spike protein from your system. So hopefully that'll help you if you're having problems. Overseas market news. The European markets are mostly higher. Istanbul, which is the biggest winner there. Latin America was mostly lower. The biggest market in Latin America, Brazil, went down by 0.79%. Africa and the Middle East mostly mixed, with Nigeria being the biggest winner there. And then in the far, far east, we have the Kospi from South Korea being the biggest loser. And most of the markets were mixed, and there wasn't really very big winners there either. A lot of drama in the Bitcoin and crypto space after the SEC, quote-unquote, was hacked on X, and they said on Tuesday that everything that was applied for in regards to the ETFs was approved. Then they rescinded that and said that their X account got hacked, and then X came out and said that they didn't have two-factor identification, which means that they probably got in their account because someone knew their password. Eventually, on Thursday, they did formally approve the first Bitcoin ETF, and it was such good news that Bitcoin went down for the week, 1.51% at just over 43,121. Commodities, crude oil rose on Friday after the U.S. and its allies launched airstrikes against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Basically, what it means is that if they are going to finish off these rebels, then they'll continue to be able to go through the Red Sea, which means that there's an uplifting feeling, let's call it, about the global economy, because then they don't have to go around the Horn of Africa and higher cost and more oil, et cetera, et cetera. Oil for the week in the United States actually went down 1.55% to 72.68, and Brent, which is the international version, went down 0.60% to 78.29. One of the things that's happening this week in the Northeast is there is a natural gas terminal that's been operating for over 50 years that has provided a safeguard whenever there was really cold weather in the U.S. Northeast. It's going to close forever in 5 months, which means that, as I explained in the beginning, since we don't have the infrastructure for a lot of the renewable energy, and this polar vortex is coming, bringing freezing temperatures, there might be a lot of blackouts. So you might want to look at a renewable energy, have batteries in your house, or have a backup generator which works on natural gas or propane, for example, because I have a feeling we're going to start to see rolling blackouts in the United States, especially after this most likely attack we're going to see this year. Gold went up 0.16%, just over 2,049. Silver went up 0.12% to 23.29. And in financial and banking news, we have an absolutely serious problem on our hands when it comes to the U.S. debt. We reached $34 trillion, and now we're on pace for paying $300 billion a year in interest every quarter. Now, I want to kind of, we're doing this to ourselves when it comes to the debt, right? And so to give you a perspective of what this looks like, we're paying about $100 billion per month just on interest on the debt. And we only collect $200 billion a month in taxes. So about 20% of the revenue collected from the U.S. government is now going to pay the national debt, and there's no end in sight. Because what's happening is now everyone else is looking at the United States and saying this isn't really a good situation for us because the inflation is high, they keep printing more money. So the less people want to buy our debt, the more dollars we're going to print, and then we're going to buy our own debt with the own money that we just printed. It's called monetization of the debt. And I'm going to explain a little story that happened in Rome, because Rome kind of did the same thing with silver coins and gold coins. They used to pay, for example, the Chinese and other people with 100% silver coins. Then they started mixing nickel and other metals, so that it was 90% and then 60% and then 50% silver. And then the Chinese found out. The Chinese didn't want to accept their money anymore because they didn't have the trust in their money anymore, kind of like what's happening to the dollar right now. And then they have to literally just print their own money. They have to monetize the debt. And that is the end game, ladies and gentlemen. Whenever we start monetizing our own debt, we're literally going to have hyperinflation, which we're very, very close to. The U.S. banking sector has started to report lower profits for quarter four. A lot of banks are starting to report that they have to put a lot more money for non-performing loans, meaning that people aren't paying the money back that they borrowed, which means that the economy isn't doing as well as they told us it was. They're expecting a 50% decline as well in trading revenue. And a bank like Citigroup, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the third or fourth largest bank in the United States, one of the largest in the world, had a $1.8 billion loss just in the fourth quarter. Remember, that's 3 months. So January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Just in those 3 months, they lost $1.8 billion. They're going to lay off 20,000 jobs over the next 2 years, and they're marred by a lot of one-off charges, supposedly. The CPI, the Consumer Price Index in Australia, went up to 4.3%. The Turkish lira, which is the money that they use in Turkey, hit a fresh record low against the U.S. dollar. If you guys don't know, the central bank in Turkey actually put their interest rates at just some ridiculous number like 20 or 30 or 40%. Can you imagine the pain that we're feeling right now in the United States with 8% interest rates or 7% interest rates? What it would be like with 30 or 40%? This actually has happened before. So look up the high inflation periods. I believe it was in the 80s. Don't quote me on that. U.S. inflation is up higher than expected in December. It went up by 0.3%. The year-over-year Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is at 3.4%. And in political news, voters in Taiwan voted for Lai Ching, which is the president that is against the Taiwanese joining the Chinese. Remember that after Japan took the island from China, China still claims Taiwan to be part of their country, while Taiwan says that they're independent. This is a definitive rejection of what China wants, because China could literally just come in and take them because they can't. That's why the United States supports Taiwan. Economic news, a Brock's food pantry, I think I mentioned in the beginning, for the first time in 10 years, forcing to turn the families away. And core producer prices, meaning that the price to produce things at the factory, is at a record high in December. It's up 17% since Biden was elected. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that was 2020, no? So 21, 22, 23. So you figure divide that by 3, that's 6, 12, 18, about 5 point something percent. So if it's 5 point something percent, then you add on the increase in the transportation, the increase in the materials to make those products, the increase in getting it to your door, the increase in, shipping it, all that stuff. The interest rate, or the inflation, I should say, is a lot higher than 3%. German industrial production unexpectedly fell in November compared to the previous month. This is the 4th largest economy in the world, very close to overtaking Japan for number 3, and the largest economy inside the European Union, which on its own, everybody who uses the euro, they're not their own country, but together, they're the 3rd largest economy in the world. That contraction marks the 6th monthly decline in a row for Germany. And if you don't know, Germany literally relies on industrial production. You know what they say, the best engineers in the world, right? Mercedes, BMW, all the things that are made there. So that's another bad sign about the economy. Cyber attacks hits the 2nd largest non-bank mortgage lender in the United States. In corporate news, it's a California-based Loan Depot. Remember that Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, I can't do a German accent, but he basically said that we're going to have some cyber attacks. And that's another reason why I'm telling you guys to look for a backup power source. Because if we have, for example, an EMP go off in New York City, or, a solar storm, this happened, it's called the Carrington event. If you guys want to Google it, it literally took out the only electrical system that we had in the world at that time. I think this was in 1876 or something like that. It literally took it out. It happened before. So if we have that again, imagine you're not able to run anything. That would be a mess. Kind of like the movie that just came out on Netflix called Leave the World Behind. Burberry crashes the most since 2012 after the luxury downturn accelerates. They lowered the profit outlook by $128 million. So zoom out again, right? This is the reason why I like to do these videos. If the rich people aren't buying purses from Burberry anymore, that means that everybody's in trouble, not just the lower class, not just the middle class. Now it's starting to affect the upper class, right? So we're definitely not heading in a good direction. And they also warned about the slowing sales in the, quote, key December trading period, right? The FAA, Federal Aviation Association, I think it stands for, basically the government regulatory body in the United States that governs everything that has to do with flying airplanes, grounded all of the Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft for inspections. If you guys remember, I think it was Alaska Airlines. The door just literally flew off of the airplane. They now have found a crack in the cockpit of a window in a plane, same kind of plane in Japan. So maybe Boeing isn't paying enough attention to detail as they used to. Samsung, another electronic conglomerate, warned investors that they anticipate a 35% drop in operating profit in fourth quarter. And Hertz Global, which is the rent-a-car behemoth, said that they are going to stop the mass adoption of electric vehicles. They're going to sell 1/3 of their fleet. That's about 20,000 vehicles. And that's in response to weak demand. And listen to this, elevated repair costs. A lot of those include Teslas as well. And including Tesla, talking about them, they fell over 3% on Friday, their stock, after they lowered the prices of a Model 3 and Model Y in China. They're also going to halt production in Germany due to the fact that they haven't been able to get the materials that they need from China because of the situation in the Red Sea with the Houthis. Not a lot of trade news in technology. NVIDIA shares rose over 6% after they announced three new graphic chips that can power PCs, also laptops, and a lot of AI in the home. And in international events, one of the largest India travel sites for 22% share of the entire Indian market, called Ease My Trip, second largest in all of India, have stopped booking flights to the Maldives due to the fact that they said some things that were disparaging against the Prime Minister of India. Problem for the Maldives, because not everybody can pay $1 bajillion a night for a boutique room on the beach. But the largest number of visitors that visit the Maldives are Russians in India, and their whole economy basically relies on tourism. So not bueno for them. Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa, he stated an emergency situation in Ecuador after the most wanted prisoner, Adolfo Macias, decided to leave prison. He has disappeared. That's how things work in Latin America. And there was also a TV station that was taken over by armed thugs. So hopefully he takes care of all of them like Bukele did in El Salvador. Savage winter hit much of the U.S. on Tuesday and forecasted throughout the rest of the week. The Panhandle in the United States, and in Florida, I should say, they just got ravaged by tornadoes. There's over 400,000 homes without power. And obviously there's polar vortex that hit the entire United States. And I'm just going to throw something out here. We all agree, scientists agree, that's what they use, right? The term that they use, that we had glaciers around the world, about 12,000 years ago. Where the United States specifically, the northern part of the United States, all of Canada, most of Northern Europe. We're talking about miles of ice, right? 2, 3, 4, 5 miles of glacier. Same, it's 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers. So from 12,000 to now, obviously we don't have ice anymore in the lower part of Canada or the northern part of the United States and Europe, right? And so the Earth just happened to warm up for whatever reason over the last 12,000 years. But for some reason, it's you and I, the ones that are causing the global warming for the last 120 years that we've been using oil and carbon. Just throwing that out there. If that makes sense to you, then you're on the wrong team. And an interesting fact this week, a huge city was found in the Amazon, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, in the eastern part of Ecuador, essentially, hidden for thousands of years. They literally found roads, buildings, all kind of things. They're using something called LiDAR, where basically they take a helicopter and they beam like laser beams and different frequencies together, and they don't have to cut down the trees to be able to find it. That could completely change the history that they were being told in schools, because one of the things that they always tell us, for example, and this is actually true, that we all came from Africa, we walked the Bering Strait from Russia to Alaska and then came down. But one of the things that's really interesting is the DNA results, since we have now these advanced blood work that we're able to do. None of the blood matches of the indigenous people now in the Amazon with the indigenous people in Central America or the United States, the Indians, or even the Eskimos in Alaska. What they do match with are the indigenous people in Papua New Guinea, which is a country north of Australia. So the question is, how did they get to the Amazon if they didn't do it by land? They probably had more advanced ships and they were sailing or maybe even flying. Who knows? That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. And remember, the preppers were right.